Hello. Today I will be talking to you about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, otherwise known as RCEP. What is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership? And/or RCEP, RCEP. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, is a free trade agreement that intertwines Asia-Pacific nations. RCEP consists of 15 different Asia-Pacific countries. Additionally, the RCEP deal involves 10 ASEAN members. ASEAN stands for Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Additionally, Thailand, China, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand are the remaining nations. Together, these 15 nations are RCEP, and/or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. From here, we should be asking ourselves, what impact will RCEP have? In summary, the goal of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is to essentially help integrate multilateral trade agreement on a global level. RCEP is predicted to impact a multitude of the world's strongest nations. Additionally, RCEP is predicted to generate more imports and exports on a global scale, which in spite could be interpreted as a positive impact for the world's GDP. However, with that being said, China and other Asia-Pacific nations are seen to be as the ones primarily benefiting from this new RCEP deal. Nevertheless, unity may possibly be on the horizon. In regard, RCEP signifies the first time Japan, China, and South Korea have signed a deal. Goals of RCEP. What are the goals of RCEP? Primarily, the main goal of RCEP is push towards promoting free trade agreements on a multilateral and mutual ground for the nations involved. Other areas of focus include creating free trade zones. In other words, tariffs on goods will be cut back tremendously or possibly even disappear completely. Grounds of RCEP. Origins. Now, I'm no history buff, but I feel it is important to examine the origins of RCEP and other free trade agreements that have taken place throughout our time. Now, looking back on a little bit of history and where free trade agreements started, one can understand that the Great Depression resulted in the collapse of international trade. In spite of the Great Depression, the United States saw opportunity in a multitude of bilateral agreements with a number of different nations. Free trade agreements began to emerge. General agreements on tariffs and trades, general agreements on tariffs and services, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and other IGOs such as CPTPP, otherwise known as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Nonetheless, the World Trade Organization and other international organizations such as the European Union, North American Free Trade Agreement, which evolved into the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, and/or ASEAN, are all representations of how groups such as the World Trade Organization have evolved and implemented ideology of free trade throughout time. Actors involved in RCEP. The main actors involved in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership are the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Additionally, as stated before, Thailand, China, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand are the remaining 5 nations. Collectively, these 15 actors make up the RCEP alliance. Identifying RCEP as an actor. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership has a variety of ways it can be examined. The RCEP agreement affects a wide range of people from the local populations to the global populations. Additionally, RCEP is also predicted to not only affect people, but will likely have effect on the natural environment. Nonetheless, the best fit identification for RCEP is an intergovernmental organization, otherwise known as an IGO. Level of analysis. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership takes up a lot of mass. In regard, the level of analysis for this international relation can categorize RCEP under a democratic, interstate, and global level. Domestic level, because there's new economic sectors and industries. It contains a form of democracy among the nations involved. There are plenty of public opinions on the new RCEP deal, and forms of nationalism can definitely be identified considering the fact that China, Japan, and South Korea are just now working on a deal together for the first time in history. On an interstate level, we can recognize that it is possible RCEP will create a transfer of power. We can also conclude that there are a number of IGOs inside and working with the RCEP alliance. There are a number of different trade agreements in act, and we can see that there are a number of forms of bargaining, especially when you take into consideration how RCEP has essentially evolved from CPTPP. However, the bargaining strategies revised from CPTPP to RCEP have excluded previous subjects that were once on the table for bargaining, such as data information and health standards for workers in Asia Pacific nations. It seems that RCEP has revised CPTPP in the way that now aligns more or better suited with the opinions and perspectives of Asian Pacific nations on how they view the health of their workers, and additionally, how they view and value data information and other technological advances. Realism versus liberalism. RCEP presents many characteristics that would argue the entity acts under a realist approach. In regards, we can speculate that RCEP acts under a realist approach due to a primary focus in the GDP, the long-term commitments between nations, and the several levels of polarity. These all seem to make up many components of RCEP as an actor. On the other hand, RCEP is speculated to act under a liberal approach due to the positive impact neighboring regions will have on one another. Another reason RCEP can be speculated under the liberalist approach is due to the fact that it has created an institution which essentially falls hand in hand with the idea of the liberal. Conclusion. In conclusion, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is on schedule to begin 60 days after January 1st, 2022. Characteristics of the liberal and the realist can be highlighted when examining RCEP. Furthermore, free trade and global unification tend to be the recurring goals of predecessors such as the World Trade Organization. Be that as it may, when examining RCEP, it is important to consider the prior trade war between China and the United States. From here, is it possible to consider that the actors of RCEP have camouflaged intent? In other words, is RCEP a new age Trojan horse for the United States? Whatever it may be, whether a Trojan horse or a blind side, we all know that all good things come to an end, and the shift of power changes, the tables turn, etc., whatever it may be. Now, if you pay attention to the way that the world's been going, we can definitely understand that China has been gaining a tremendous influence of power in the past couple of years. With an exceeding rate of imports and exports, leaving from China to the EU, it's definitely reasonable for the US to be worrisome or to maybe see RCEP as a Trojan horse. However, China can definitely say that RCEP is more of a liberal approach due to the positive impact that it will essentially have on these Asia Pacific nations. But on the other hand, you got to consider the fact that you can keep some things to yourself. And when you think about things like that, then you're more on a realist approach. And so as we know, Obama, I believe, signed us into TPP around 2015. A couple years later, Trump pulled us out of TPP with his whole focus about America first. Little did he know how that would affect us in the long run. In regards, it's also kind of funny to think about how we pulled out of TPP and yet Trump considered jumping back into TPP, but instead landed a form of agreement I believe was called the Phase 1 agreement. Now, speculating on the Phase 1 agreement, I'm pretty sure it wasn't that successful. Basically, we were supposed to export about 200 billion some odd dollars to China, and then China was going to export about 400 some odd billions of goods to us. And so it was basically a mutual agreement. Like, you buy stuff from us, we'll buy stuff from you. Coincidentally, during the Phase 1, we have COVID. And so that's where things get a little interesting. Because you consider all the things that, goods and services that, are going to be at a halt. And then you can also take into account that a lot of these Asian countries, such as China, were at a force of hand to us when it came to medical equipment. And here we are today without any sort of alliance or agreement with China. And it seems we do not know what the path is for the future. Because back in the fall, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia signed an agreement called AUKUS, which essentially brings nuclear power into the Indo-Pacific region to Australia. And one could say that that would, make China mad or piss them off. And coincidentally or not, a couple days after AUKUS was signed, China had applied to be a part of the CPTPP. And so, if you think about it, if they have some sort of dual force, them being a part of RCEP and being a part of CPTPP, that just makes their numbers a little bit stronger. And so as we move into the future, with all these technological advances and everything that's been going on in the world, it is definitely, up for debate on whether the United States is still going to remain in power or if certain treaties like RCEP are going to make the tables turn.